Hello and welcome to Chapter 1, Adobe Premiere Pro CS6, setting up a project and a sequence in Adobe Premiere. Before you begin editing your video, you're going to need to create a new project and choose some settings for your first sequence. In practice, you're likely to make very few changes to the default settings that Premiere Pro has, but just the same, it's good to know what the options really mean. Basically, a Premiere Pro project file stores links to all the video and sound files or clips that you use in your Premiere Pro project. A project file also has at least one sequence or series of clips that play one after the other with special effects, titles, and sounds to form your completed creative work. In other words, a sequence is simply what the final product will look like. Remember, Premiere Pro project files have the file extension .prproj. You need to know the kind of video and audio your camera records because your sequence settings will usually be based on your original source clips. So to make it easier for you to choose the right settings, Premiere Pro sequence presets are named after the different camera recording formats. So if you know the video format your camera records, you'll know what to choose. So let's begin by creating a new project, and we're going to launch Premiere Pro. As you see here, you're going to get a welcome screen. And the welcome screen has 4 buttons basically: a new project button, an open project button, a help button, the exit button, and of course you can also close up here in the upper right corner. Plus it has a list of recent projects. Now for our purposes, we're going to create a new project, so we're simply going to click New Project. Once you do that, you get the New Project dialog box, and it consists of two tabs: the General tab and the Scratch Disk tab. All of the settings in this dialog can be changed later, but in most cases you're going to want to leave them like they are. But just the same, we want to know what they are really about. First, we have video rendering and playback here at the top on the General tab. Some special effects can be played immediately, combining your original video with the effect and displaying the results for you as soon as you click play. And when that happens, that's called real-time playback. Real-time playback is desirable because it means you can watch the results of your creative choices right away. And many special effects in Premiere Pro are designed to be in real time. But if you use a lot of effects, or you use effects that are not designed to be played in real time, your computer may not be able to display the results at the full frame rate. In other words, Premiere Pro is going to attempt to display your video clips combined with the special effects, but it's not going to show every single frame each second. And when that happens, it's described as dropping frames. Premiere Pro displays colored lines along the top of the timeline panel to tell you when extra work is required to play back your video. Not seeing every frame when you play your sequence is okay, because it's not going to affect your final results, but it can make a difference in the editing situation and your ability to preview effects that you apply with knowing that they're going to look right. So there's a simple solution, and it's called rendering. When you choose to render, Premiere Pro produces a new video file that looks exactly like the part of your sequence you've selected, known as the work area, with all the special effects applied. And now every time that part of your sequence is played, Premiere Pro automatically and invisibly switches to the new video file and plays that instead. When that part of your sequence finishes, then Premiere Pro invisibly switches back to playing the next clips in your sequence. This means Premiere Pro can play back the results of your special effects at full quality and at full frame rate without your computer having to do any more work than playing a regular video file. In practice, telling Premiere Pro to render is as simple as pressing a single key on your keyboard, the Enter key, or choosing an option in a menu. And you're going to see that we're going to be able to choose render effects in the work area or render the entire work area later on. The downside with rendering is that it takes up extra space on your hard drive and it takes some time. It also means that you're viewing a new video file based on your original media, and that might introduce some loss of quality. But the upside with rendering is you can be sure your system will be able to play the results of your effect at full quality with all the frames per second. Real time is instant. The only downside with real-time performance is that the amount you can do without rendering depends on how powerful your system is. In the case of Premiere Pro, you can dramatically improve real-time performance by using the right graphics card. Plus, you'll need to use effects that are designed for real-time playback, and not all effects are. Now, if the renderer menu is available, in my case, it is not. It means that you have the right graphics hardware for GPU acceleration in your computer and it is installed correctly. Well, that's not the case with me because you can see that mine is grayed. My area here is grayed out. In that case, there's nothing you can do about it. If, other than buy the correct graphics hardware and install it, and then you can have the choice here, because what it'll give you the choice of, you can read here, it says Mercury Playback Engine software only, or the other option would be Mercury Playback Engine GPU acceleration, or CUDA. You'll almost certainly want to choose the GPU option and benefit from the additional performance if you can. So if you do have this option, definitely choose that option, the GPU acceleration one. I'm not going to go any further into the Mercury Playback Engine. Suffice it to say at this point, if you can choose the GPU option, do it. And if you don't have that option, then we'll ignore it and move on. The next two options involve video and audio display format. And basically these options tell Premiere Pro how to measure time for your video and audio clips. Now, the time situation in video editing is a little confusing. So I'm going to go over some basics and then we'll leave it at that. Let's first talk about seconds and frames. When a camera records video, it captures a series of still images of the action. If there are enough images captured each second, it looks like moving video when it's played back. Each picture is called a frame, and the number of frames each second is usually called frames per second, or FPS. The frames per second will vary depending on the camera format and settings. It could be 23.976, 24, 25, 29.97, 50, or 59.94. Some cameras allow you to choose between more than one frame rate, with different options for accompanying frame sizes. Premiere Pro will play back video at all common frame rates. Let's first talk about the video display format. There are 4 options for video display format, and if you just drop down the box, you'll see that you have time code, feet plus frames 16 millimeter, feet plus frames 35 millimeter, and frames. Well, let's talk about each just a little bit. First, time code. This is the default option, and time code is a universal standard for counting hours, minutes, seconds, and individual frames for video files or tape. The same system is used by cameras, professional video recorders, and non-linear editing systems all around the world. Next, we have feet plus frames 16 millimeter and feet plus frames 35 millimeter. If your source files are captured from film and you intend to give your editing decisions to a lab so they can cut the original negative to produce a finished film, you may want to use this standard method of measuring time. Rather than measuring time, it's the number of feet plus the number of frames since the last foot. It's a bit like feet and inches, but with frames rather than inches, because 16mm film and 35mm film have different size frames, and so different numbers of frames per foot. There's an option for each one. Finally, we have frames. This option simply counts the number of frames of video starting at 0. It's sometimes used for animation projects, and it's another way that labs like to receive information about edits for a film-based project. But for our purposes, we will leave our display format on timecode. Now, let's move on to audio display format. And when we drop down the box here, you see you've got two options, audio samples and milliseconds. Well, audio samples, basically when digital audio is recorded, a sound sample is taken as captured by the microphone thousands of times a second. In the case of most professional video cameras, this happens 48,000 times per second. In audio samples mode, PremPro will display time in your sequences as hours, minutes, seconds, and samples. The number of samples per second will depend on your sequence settings. As for milliseconds, with this mode selected, PremPro will display time in your sequence as hours, minutes, seconds, and thousandths of a second. By default, PremPro lets you zoom in to your sequences to view individual frames. However, you can easily switch to displaying your audio display format. This powerful feature lets you make the tiniest adjustments to your sound. But for this project, we're going to leave it on audio samples. Now, let's talk about the capture format. Basically here, you've got two options, DV and HDV capture. Without additional third-party hardware, PremPro can record from DV and HDV cameras using the FireWire connection on your computer, if it has one. FireWire is also known as IEEE 1394 and iLink. For our purposes today, and mostly for the future, we go with DV. Now let's move to our next tab, Scratch Disk. Before we go down to location and name, down here at the bottom, we're going to touch on it because it applies. The Scratch Disk tab basically is asking you, where do you want to save all of your captured video, captured audio, video previews, audio previews, where do you want these things to go? Now, it gives you a drop-down menu because you can choose same as project as is the default, and that's the one we're going to choose. But you can also choose to have it go to documents, or if you like, you can browse and put it somewhere specific. Basically, whenever PremPro captures records from tapes or renders your special effects, new media files are created on your hard drive. Scratch disks are the places these new files are stored. Scratch disks can be created in all in the same place or in separate locations depending on your hardware and workflow requirements. There are generally two approaches to storage for video editing. There's project-based setup, which is all associated media files are stored with the project file in the same folder, and that's the one we're going to use. And there's system-based setup, where media files associated with multiple projects are saved to one central location and the project file is saved to another. We're going to use the project-based setup. Now, the next thing is, where are we going to save this? Well, we'll talk about that specifically in class, but for now, I'm going to just show you that I click Browse, and I go to the desktop and choose a TV Pro folder. You'll do the same, but you're going to access a server when we get to that point. So you would select your folder, and then you would give your project a name. In this case, we're just going to go with Chapter 1. And when we click OK, and now my new sequence box pops up.